Hi, students. We are at the final week of class. And so our final lecture will be very simple. I will be going over the responsibility to protect, a very important doctrine that you should know about as we think about 21st century concerns. And then I'll do a brief course wrap up, and then we will conclude with announcements. So, very short and straightforward agenda. All right, what is the responsibility to protect? It is basically a commitment that was unanimously approved at the 2005 World Summit. And at this point, it was the largest gathering of heads of state. Their concern was that they needed to prevent and protect against four serious problems: genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. So the responsibility for the international community was not to protect each and every good and important thing. So notice that religious persecution does not trigger the R2P, but just narrowly these four serious problems. Organizationally, what this means is that the UN Secretary General, since 2009, has been publishing annual reports on R2P, meaning what have states been doing to prevent genocide or war crimes, etc. In what cases has the international community had to respond, etc., etc. Now, the origins of this is tied to the failure for the international community to have prevented some major cases of genocide in the 1990s. So one thinks of Rwanda, one thinks of the former Yugoslavia. And there was a concern that, look, relying on state sovereignty was not enough. And even the various international peacekeepers and the safe cities that were established in the case of former Yugoslavia was not enough. We need something stronger. So now what I want to do is I want to read the portions of the 2005 World Summit that talks about the R2P. So paragraph 138. Each individual state has the responsibility to protect its populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. This responsibility entails the prevention of such crimes, including their incitement, through appropriate and necessary means. We accept that responsibility and will act in accordance with it. The international community should, as appropriate, encourage and help states to exercise this responsibility and support the United Nations in establishing an early warning capability. Okay, next clause, 139. The international community, through the United Nations, also has the responsibility to use appropriate diplomatic, humanitarian, and other peaceful means in accordance with chapters 6 and 8 of the Charter to help to protect populations, again, from these four crimes: genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. In this context, we are prepared to take collective action in a timely and decisive manner through the Security Council in accordance with the Charter, including Chapter 7, on a case-by-case basis and in cooperation with relevant regional organizations as appropriate, should peaceful means be inadequate and national authorities are manifestly failing to protect their populations from genocide, war crime, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. So in other words, the international community vows to use all peaceful means to prevent and protect against these four terrible things. In the event where these four things are happening, with the proper authorization of the Security Council, they will use violent means if necessary, again, in service of the protection of these four things. That is basically what this clause, paragraph 139, is saying. Okay, so 3 pillars, and if you Google R2P, you will sometimes see this put in pillar form. Pillar 1, every state, so building on the sovereignty model, has the responsibility to protect its populations from 4 mass atrocity crimes. So first, it's the states. So the U.S. has the responsibility to protect within the U.S., and China within China, and Israel within Israel, and Chile within Chile, etc., etc. Pillar 2, the wider international community has the responsibility to encourage and assist individual states in meeting that responsibility. Okay. And number 3, if a state manifestly fails to protect its population, the international community must be prepared to take appropriate collective action. So again, you first rely on states to manage their own affairs and protect its populations from those 4 mass atrocity crimes. Now, if the state fails, then the international community must be prepared, must be mobilized to respond. So there are obligations. Very, very importantly, R2P can be contrasted with the so-called, what's been called humanitarian intervention in these ways. Number 1, R2P is first and foremost a preventative principle. It is trying to prevent these things, not trying to react to them when they happen. Number 2, it is actually rooted in international law because it was passed under, the 2005 World Summit. And so it protects sovereignty and, again, with these measures, and you need UN Security Council authorization, again, number 4, not just any group of concerned states. The 3, again, what's the difference between humanitarian intervention and R2P? Well, again, R2P is narrowly focused on 4 mass atrocity crimes, whereas sometimes people do a humanitarian intervention for all sorts of reasons, right? Okay. And then again, the right and obligation to intervene, which is something that humanitarian intervention focuses on, whereas R2P is the responsibility to protect. Now, of course, there's going to be areas of overlap between humanitarian intervention and R2P, but please do take a look at these noticeable differences. So again, I thought this was an appropriate way to end the class, as we've discussed, going beyond traditional thinking about war and justified war and folding in 21st century concerns. Now moving into a wrap-up, we have done quite a bit. In the class, we talked about war in general, and we talked about how religion and how prayer in particular figures in war. This is how we began. Then we moved to talking about Christian perspectives. We took a look at Lisa Cahill's book, and we looked at these 4 dominant models and the role of Jesus and her focus on moral dilemmas and these transitional figures of people who don't fit perfectly in pacifist or just war camps. That would be Reinhold Niebuhr, Karl Barth, and Dorothy Day, right? We then talked quite a bit about pacifism and focused specifically on Danny Weaver's concept of nonviolent atonement in contrast to others. We talked about his larger question of, does God work through violence? And that brought him to the Bible to have to rethink traditional interpretations, or not necessarily traditional, but even contemporary interpretations of various Bible passages. But as I mentioned, Weaver's version of Christian nonviolence is not the only one. He's a Mennonite. He's in the Anabaptist tradition, but there are other varieties, and that was what the field guide was designed to introduce you to. We then spent quite a bit of time talking about the just war tradition. We talked about use ad bellum criteria. I assigned the movie the mission for you to work through it. And then, of course, we worked through in bello criteria of discrimination and proportionality. And during the intensive, we really got to test your understanding of some of the tensions between and among these, and how exactly to think about the principle of double effect. We concluded the first half of the class talking about Christian realism. We focused, of course, on the work of Reinhold Niebuhr and a famous debate that he had with his brother. During the intensive, I showed the film An American Conscience, talking about Reinhold Niebuhr's life, and we also did a close reading of Obama's Nobel Prize speech, where you were able to identify Christian realist elements in it. We started our interlude and we picked it up talking about Israel-Palestine. How could we not? For I think almost all of you, this scholar was a new one. This book was a new one. It was challenging, but something you felt that was really helpful to think about in terms of settler colonialism and just post-colonial thinking in general being brought to bear on the Israel-Palestine situation. Okay, concluding our interlude, we had a week on military chaplains. We had a week on moral injury. My faithful TA led you through military chaplains and use in bello. And then we also had some really, really great discussion, especially on teams, about both, especially moral injury. I really, really enjoyed your posts. In the last weeks, we've discussed drone warfare, and a number of you said on teams you hadn't realized that most drones are actually used for surveillance as opposed to drop bombs. And then just today, we were talking about the responsibility to protect, how it's a response to failures of the international community to respond to these mass atrocities. So we did actually quite a bit in this class. As I mentioned during the intensive, it's a heavy topic. We are literally talking about, killing and terrible things that people can do to one another. We are talking about an unresolved conflict among Christians who are trying to work out the appropriateness of the use of force. So thank you so much for hanging in there and every week being open to the readings, whether you found them persuasive or not, being willing to be persuaded by the force of the better argument. That was really fantastic. In terms of last things, that final work for this class is due next week, May 13 and 14, whatever option you are doing. Okay. Spring semester grades, for me, this is something I cannot change, but I must submit grades by May 24th. If you find yourself in a situation where you need more time, I can accept papers a little bit later. Do you see there's some time between May 14th and May 24th? But I cannot change the fact that I must submit your grade by May 24th. So ideally, you're done with the class work by next week. If you need more time, send me an email and we can see what we can do. Otherwise, it has been a pleasure and a joy for me to be your instructor. As I said during intensive week, you guys are now my first intensive students ever after having taught at CST since 2009, and I will always remember that. Looking forward to you all finishing out the course strong, and if any questions, get in touch. And even if you don't have any questions, I look forward to continuing conversations with you beyond the course of this class If things come across your feed and you think of me, feel free to drop me a line. I always love hearing from you. Okay, thanks. Bye bye.